Aha. All right. Welcome, people of the internet's viewers, lovely folks. Welcome to June. It's officially almost, it's not quite summer, but it feels like summer. It's hot out here. I wonder how hot it is out in my friend Zach, who's over there. How hot it is out there. Hi, Zach. That's Zach. And I'm
That's
wondering how hot
Greg.
it is. I am Greg. How hot is it out there?
I'll tell you, it's not too hot yet, but it's going to be soon. It is currently 75 degrees.
Ah, okay. Yeah, it's like
Sunny
89 out
conditions for the
here.
rest of the day. Wind gusts are up to 18 miles an hour.
Oh, wow. All right, so we need to make sure you're careful of all those zephyrs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but we're here. We are here and ready to go with GenGMs. Welcome everybody, and we do want to thank everyone who was watching. We want to thank everyone who subscribed, and we do want to remind everybody or let everyone know. So we're sitting at 96 subscribers. We are 4 subscribers away from that 100 triple digit moment, which is like the big. That's the like you get your first subscriber. That's a big deal. 10 is a big deal. 100 is a big deal, and then you start moving up from there. 1,000. 10,000, multiple deals with Critical Role. But like, you go up in
Oh
this
gosh.
certain process. But no,
Yeah.
please do. It's free for you to do that. And it definitely helps us out and you can get content from us. So thank you all those who have followed and all that kind of stuff. And otherwise we're here and ready to go. Zach has been doing his pro DM thing and
Yeah.
we were just talking about a bunch of various DMing things.
Mhm.
And I guess this is just a very brief question. Is there like have you had, I guess, has there been like one thing that stood out to you over the last couple of weeks? You're like, this was amazing. Like, that's not my
Yeah.
question. I'm just curious.
Yep. I recently ran a gig for a group of kids. This was, I think, our eighth session together. So
Okay.
they're, the one kid's parent reached out to me initially, I think almost 2 years ago now, like, hey, can you run D&D for my daughter and her friends? And now we have been doing that off and on every couple months.
Okay.
And so I recently, I think it was last week, my sense of time is all over the place. I need to go check my calendar. But I ran a gig for them last week, and it the leading up to this eighth session, we hadn't had all six players at the table
Ah,
yet. Like they had all been like smatterings of everything, but we finally got all six players at the table, and so I planned a sort of like cinematic montage at the start that would highlight what each person was doing
yeah.
in all the things that they enjoy. Like, for example, one of the kids, she's not really into the mechanics of D&D as much as I can tell. But what she really loves having her character do is whenever she meets an NPC, she likes to braid their hair. So
Okay.
I
All right.
have, of course, incorporated. I run Ravnica, which is a Magic the Gathering setting, and one of the guilds of Ravnica is run by a bunch of angels. These women with huge wings that are basically like military, um, sort of Amazonian women. And of course, I had them. They return from a battle. They're all like bloody and everything. They're protecting the city of Ravnica. They take their helmets off. They go in, and this little fairy is braiding their hair. She was so happy. It was great.
That's awesome.
And then panning to the rogue character doing rogue stuff, and the warlock character doing summoning demon rituals. So the point I'm getting to, the interesting thing that I tried that, well, I feel mixed about it, was that they each have really varied interests. And of course, I've often done sessions where it's like they're all together and they face one boss that has
Sure.
like that's threatening them in general.
Hmm.
But I was like, oh, what if I have like six character development scenes happening where, because they're all in different guilds pretty much, that are happening concurrently. So what I did is I brought little map pieces and I set up six encounters and rolled one initiative, all with the exception of one scene that did have two players, but all six players were essentially in different scenes in one initiative, all fighting different things at the same time, but they could see each other's maps on the table.
Wow.
And they were like these little, maybe like this size maps. And I was like, hey, rogue, you're getting attacked by a rogue from your own guild. The character who likes to braid hair, you're having to see people who want their hair braided. The druids had to stop poachers. We have two druid characters, and so I put a bear cub in danger and they had to save the bear cub. Warlock doing ritual. So I had all these happening at once and then initiative happening. It was great. Problem was is that the idea of D&D turns taking a long time continues to be a thing. And the problem of that is exasperated by the fact that when it's not their turn, they're not even involved in the same combat. So unless they're a very like altruistic and
Yeah.
interested player,
Yeah.
they're probably just gonna zone out, which is what happened. So they get their little time to shine, and I was envisioning like, oh, cool. Won't for me as a player, I thought it would be really cool to like see these other scenes and like to be engaged in what other people were a part of. But they are young enough that they are very self-centered still. They may not know it yet, and they do love playing together. But when it wasn't their time, they were kind of like, whatever, and they were playing around or doodling or whatever. So it was okay. I'd be interested to try that sort of thing with adults, but in the future, the next session, we're going to start with some combat with a sphinx. So there's going to be like riddle elements that I'll come up with, but they're all going to be together. So that was an interesting thing I tried. I'd never
Yeah.
tried that before of like having all the players at your table, all in combat in all different locations, all at the same time. It's interesting.
Yeah, that
Uh,
I don't think I've ever run six. I've run a lot of strange combats in all different division sorts. I don't
mhm.
think I've ever run six consecutive or concurrent, I should say, combats,
Yeah,
right? Like in different places. That's but I mean, but it's an experiment it feels like that you need to have if you're going to be able to do
yeah,
your job as a DM and continue to stretch, like
exactly.
not being afraid to fail, so to speak. So,
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that I tried it, and I think because if anything too, it's especially with the kids there, I can sort of adapt on the fly, and it's not some big corporate gig where I have to be, want to be very, very sure that it's going super well. But especially with that, these kids, I've been running with them for 8 sessions. They're all kind of like used to each other and
right.
things like that, and they're up for more experimental stuff. I think at the end of it all, though, they all still say that was amazing. I had a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
so for me, my
Yeah.
criticisms as an adult, and as the GM running it are probably different than them like, wow, that was really cool.
Totally. Well, the other thing too,
So
I think is important, and I know you know this, but the difference between obviously kids and adults, it's fairly rare for kids of a certain age to be able to be like, I'm really focused on what you're saying right now. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
kids a lot of times are like, you're like, are you hello? But they're
Yeah.
picking up, they tend to pick up all of it, right? If they're not being
Hmm.
distracted by a phone or a laptop or whatever, a lot of kids sometimes have difficulty honing in the way that adults do. Like I'm looking at you and we're talking
Yeah.
and and so they may pick it up anyway, even sort of by osmosis. And I totally agree. I've had situations where I was like, "How did that session go?" And I've had people just be like, "That was awesome," and I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, because, and then they'll come up with specific because of this and this and this. I'm like, oh, so yeah,
Yeah.
you know, you were paying attention. Like, yeah, yeah. So that's an interesting lesson
Hmm.
in how to read your players, I guess.
Yeah.
With
Did you
stuff.
have anything happen recently with jamming that was cool
I think the
or
big thing,
interesting?
honestly, the one that I was going to mention was since we last recorded here, we did ArvCon, which is
Hmm.
the charity event that I run to benefit the Damon Running Cancer Research Foundation. It went very well. And the experience that I had that I loved was getting to play on the Friday of that event, something which then became a two shot. And that
Yeah.
was the D&D event that you made up
Yeah.
for the voice acting team on the channel, which you participate in, which is called the ArvCon. And so it was you were GMing, and it was me playing along with Rem, who's one of the people there. KP was not there the first time, but he was there the second time, and
Hmm.
then Indy both times. Now our mutual friend Indy, Jordan, who's also a musician, and both of us have met in person. Jordan had never played D&D before. And so and he and we and you wouldn't have known it if you were watching him. Like he was
Honestly.
quite good. But everyone had just an absolute blast, and it was awesome for me, first of all, to get to play. Secondly, to play with you GMing, because I've seen you GM, but I have never actually been in a session where you GM'd, and you did an exceptional job, as I might have expected. And then three, the third thing was the fact that you had so perfectly tailored this adventure to voice acting, like the whole thing. Basically, if you folks have not seen it yet, you should go over to my personal YouTube channel, which is That's my Twitch YouTube channel, Arvaneleron. And you'll see there's a playlist on there for ArvCon, and you'll be able to see under the playlist for ArvCon this D&D event. And so, without spoiling too much of it, it has a lot to do with voicing and silence and like how those things balance out. But I was just struck by it's the classic, like knowing how the sausage is made. So like admiring like what a GM is doing and
Yeah.
being like, that's super cool. That's really cool. Like seeing how you put all that together for a group of players and getting a chance to see how well targeted it was for a group that was focusing on voice was super cool. So wanted to give you your props. You were great in that event, and I that was awesome. That was the most fun that I had. It was a great weekend, but that was the most fun that I had specifically about that. So
Oh,
yeah,
I had a great time too. It was wonderful. Yeah, getting to GM for you finally, and GMing for Rem was also really fun. I did not expect her, and she even said this too, which is what made it funny, is that she usually plays the characters that are trying to keep the order and like keep the plot going, and
yeah.
that's actually usually how she is on our vocalist as well. Is like she, and Dot was like this too,
Tries to keep
where
people on task
yeah,
a little bit.
on
Yeah,
task and like helping with puzzles. That was more Dot's thing. Now that I think about
right.
it, when we were doing Mario, but yeah, then Rem, the character she played, was just completely chaotic and like getting into everything, and it was great. I loved because it having someone who was not who was constantly testing the boundaries is great as a GM because it gives me something to react to that's not just being careful.
Yes,
Um, but yeah, and then Indy coming up with a character arc spontaneously that
that's
was
great.
actually good. It
That's
was
so great.
it was
Oh
really
man,
great.
a character arc that's basically I'm not a disaffected teen anymore, more or less. Like
Yeah, I
it
mean it
was
was
it was
I
great.
thought it was great. But yeah, yeah. Going I have to silence my inner critic and you know, there's more that I would have done or changed it or I wish that I could have fit it in a single session. But I'm glad that it ended up happening the way that it did, honestly, because then we got KP for the second time.
Yeah,
We had a full boss fight that featured all the mechanics and everything, and so yeah, I had a great time.
yeah. And I think it worked out to like, I think in the end it was about 6-ish hours. And
Mhm.
probably if we didn't have all the ArvCon stuff, certainly if you were not streaming it, you could do that in 4 hours,
Yeah.
and with streaming it and the ArvCon stuff, it added a couple hours. But
Mhm.
that's definitely a one shot worthy, adventure. So,
Yeah, yeah. I had
definitely,
yeah,
and you
for
and you
having
have that
never
now in
run
your
it
back
before.
pocket to pull out.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That scenario of like the voiceless king,
Yeah,
as
it
you'll
was
find
cool.
if you go and
It was
watch it.
cool. Plus, also, and it's like a tailor made, the
Yeah,
Voiceless
yeah.
King is a perfect title
Hmm.
for,
Hmm.
that's awesome. So yeah, it was great. That was the highlight, TTRPG wise, my last
Great.
month. Yeah.
Well, good.
So
Okay. I guess it's only fitting. Maybe I ask you a question now. We've asked these many questions.
yeah, sure,
We're
sure.
we the those of you who are listening, we get confused every time we do these on who asked the last question first or not. We never keep track of it.
Yeah.
We try to alternate, but at this point, we both asked a question. So um, I'll just ask you
Okay, that
mine,
sounds
and
good.
then you'll ask me yours. So my question for this episode of Gen GMs
Right.
is what are some things that you have crossed off your GM bucket list
Ooh.
and some things you still want to cross off your GM bucket list?
Ah, that's great. Okay. So things I have crossed off my GM bucket list. Um, I had always wanted to run an extended level 1 to level 20 campaign. I can't, knocking on wood, I guess, because I could faceplant in the next year, but assuming everything stays as it is, then we will finish the Eberron Oracle of War campaign I've been running by the end of the year. They are now to level 17. We
Mhm.
are in the season premiere of this is on Saturday, actually, the final season. And it has worked exactly as I hoped. It's been a group of people that are experienced veteran players. They have really connected together. It has not gotten too much. They have not overmatched. The classic thing you hear about how like, D&D doesn't scale, which I continue to argue is not true. But anyway, like that has not happened. They have been challenged. They've also been challenged in terms of their interpersonal stuff. So it's been really great. So that's the first thing is that I'm almost to the end of that mix. Of getting them all the way up to level 20. I think if they get through everything, they will turn level 20 as the campaign comes to an end, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's assuming they survive, and they may not. I mean, like there's like, it's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
But that's one thing. So, and then related to it is that I always wanted to run a campaign in Eberron, which is I know your favorite thing is Ravnica. I love Eberron as a
Mhm.
setting. And so I've gotten to do that. I've gotten to do that for several years now, and so I feel very good that I've gotten to do Eberron, which I always wanted to do as a part of that. So those are two definite things. The other thing I'm hesitant to say because I always wanted to run live Dungeons and Dragons events. And now I've done that multiple times, and I don't want to be like, right, so I'm done doing that. Like, I'd like to do more of those,
Right.
honestly. Like, I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
enjoy them, but I've had the chance to do that in multiple places. I've had a chance to do it 3 times basically to date in America. No, not counting Gen Con. So Gen Con also counts. So really counting that, three, six. So really 9 times in America, 6 of them at Gen Con, and then 3 times outside of Gen Con.
Mhm.
And I've gotten to run a live event now overseas in Europe, which has also been amazing. So like, so I've gotten to do those things that I really wanted to do. So that's been very cool. The thing that I would love to do though, that is still remaining on the bucket list is I would like to do at some point an epic D&D event. And by that I mean there are several adventures that are out there and sort of concepts of adventures in which you are running multiple tables. So
Uh-huh.
it's a high level thing, right? Where you have like basically an epic battle against a colossus or something like that. I
Mhm.
would love to actually basically create what is essentially a division, where you've got 4 or 5 tables. And my idea would incorporate basically 4 or 5 DMs or GMs running things for the first few hours, and then me running a sort of mega event with
Wow.
those tables having reached this one place. I would love to be able to do that. I think it would be epic to watch too. I think it would be, but obviously there were some challenges. You have to figure out how to it has to be, do you do it on stage? You have a big enough stage for different tables to be there? How do people follow it? Obviously, it's online, it's more easy, but that's not quite as cool as doing it sort of in person. I
Right.
thought about the possibility of doing this even as like a theater in the round thing, where you've got people in the middle in these tables and then you've got like people around watching them. So that I still have not worked out all of how that works, but I would love to be able to do it because one of my fondest memories of having something like that was, and I think I've talked about that with you or on here, and if I have, I apologize to everybody, but one of my fondest memories is running the game Werewolf, which is based on the game Mafia, which some people have played, which is where
Mhm.
you're like, you have a group of people sitting around and they're all part of a village. And one person or 2 people, depending on how many people are playing with, are werewolves. And every night, the werewolves kill one of the villagers. They close their eyes, and there's always a narrator who watches. And then the werewolves secretly pick a person, and the only one who knows it is the narrator. And then the person dies, and then the village has to find the werewolves before the werewolves kill off the villagers.
Mhm.
That's sort of really oversimplifying, but that's basically it. So my favorite time that I ever saw that was when I was living in New York, and we had neighbors upstairs that were having a group of relatives in from the Dominican Republic. So there were like 30 or 40 people in this small apartment upstairs, all looped around like this sort of living area, like packed in, right?
Uh-huh.
And they said to me, they're like, "Oh, I know you do games. Like, can you do a game for them?" And I'm like, "A game?" And like 50% of these people don't only speak Spanish. They don't speak English.
Oh
And I was
wow.
like, so I so I did. So I was like, well, I can't do a regular like D&D game. So I ran a game of Werewolf for them. Um and so and it was so I'm like laying out the thing, and like half of the people are translating to the other half of the people in Spanish, right? And I'm like, they're like blah
Mm.
blah 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 blah, right? And the most awesome part of it was one of the kids who was one of the people that actually of the family of 5 that lived above us in this apartment, everyone else was visiting from the DR. One of those kids was the werewolf. So he was like going around, and this comes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier about the reaction that people have to you
Mhm.
when it seems like they might not be focused. Because there's one guy there who is an older guy, must have been in his like 60s probably. And he speaks only Spanish. He's got his arms folded, and the whole time he's like, and I'm like, oh God, I guess this guy is not having a good. But he's just sort of staring and listening, right?
Mhm.
So at one point, the villagers are debating who the werewolf might be, and at this point, the werewolves have already killed like 4 or 5 villagers. So the werewolves are feeling pretty good about themselves, and the guy suddenly is like, "Que padre," and he just starts speaking Spanish, right? And so the person next to him, who's like one of the cousins, who's a teenager, she starts translating Spanish, and she's like, in my country, in my village, literally says, in my country, in my village, in my country, in my village, we had people like this. And he looks right at the kid who is actually a werewolf. He's like, we had people like this. You can tell when they are lying. This one is the werewolf. He says all of this. And I'm like, and we're all sort of staring at him, and the guy's just silent. And so he's kind of the patriarch. So everyone is like,
Right.
okay, absolutely right. So he gets it right. The room just erupts. Everyone is high-fiving each
Oh
other,
my
and the guy is just
God.
like just silently nodding. I was like, this is the greatest thing of my. So that is one of my favorite experiences of all time because Spanish and English,
Yeah.
everyone translating with each other, everyone had a blast, and it was because there were so many. It literally was a village of people. Like it was like 30
Yeah.
people. So it literally was like that. And it just showed me how universal the language of gaming really is. Like the guy was not bored at all. Like he was 100% on it. He knew who it was. The kid couldn't believe it that he picked him too. He was just like, I can't believe you figured it out.
Wow.
And everyone is just like, and they're like chanting at each other in Spanish. It was the best. So any event like that that gives me that feeling of the sort of the audience all picking up on the energy in the room is great. So that's
Wow.
my D&D bucket list thing.
So mainly uh running that big something on a large scale that's not.
Yeah.
I think maybe both of us have had a lot of experience of like, okay, we're running D&D for a normal size table of 4 or whatever, and
Or
then
for
there's an audience
audiences,
and
but
that's it.
not with a number of
Yeah.
players.
But
Like
then
most
like,
I've ever had is like 8, not
yeah,
counting that what I just described.
yeah. But having like a bunch of people all playing D&D in one centralized purpose.
Yeah.
When you're at something like Gen Con, which I've never been to until this year, later this year. Um, aren't there, my conception is similar to the one time I went to Big Bad Con, and they have like a multi-purpose room that's just full of gaming tables where
Oh,
people are gaming.
many examples of that for sure, but
Yeah,
they're generally not doing the same thing.
right.
They're doing multiple iterations of one adventure, or they're doing different adventures, or whatever. Yeah. Oh,
Mm,
yeah. There's lots of that for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that it would be cool then to organize some big D&D event like that. You don't have that's your main thing? That's great. That's cool. I think that should happen. I volunteer as DM tribute
yay.
for one of those, but
I would
um
love to do that.
you've already run D&D, across the sea. Um there's no other bucket list things that happen.
Oh,
I think
well,
finishing a 1 to 20 campaign is amazing. I also that's on my list too, but
yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, I would like to run. I mean, to be clear, like I would like to. I mean, I'd love to be able to. We've talked about this. I'd love to DM for certain celebrities, like
mm,
former President Obama. Straight
yeah.
up, would love to play. I'm no not joking. Like it would be an
No,
incredible
of
honor to
course.
DM for President Obama. It would be great to. I would love to have the opportunity to DM with other sort of or just play with other sort of luminaries. I'd love to. I mean, I guess I'm getting one example of this coming up at Gen Con is when my TTRPG of Greyshade, based on my universe of Greyshade, is releasing, designed by someone that you and I both know, Brandon O'Brien. And
Right.
like that, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to actually be playing in an adventure of that at Gen Con for in front of an audience while Brandon DMs or GMs. So that's
Hmm.
going to be awesome. I guess that's another bucket list thing. But I mean, so yeah, there's lots of little things like that. It's just if I think of boy, I really would love for this thing to happen, like that's kind of what I would D&D in a castle also would be nice.
Yeah,
That would
that
be
is
kind of cool.
cool.
Yeah.
I've heard both great things and not so great things about D&D in a castle. I think that there are multiple D&D in a castles though. I
They're
think
so
there's literally
expensive.
an event called D&D in a
Called
castle
in a castle for sure.
that tries to market itself as the one, but then there's
So
other
freaking pricey though.
D&Ds hosted
Yep.
in a castle that
Hmm.
aren't the D&D in a castle. But
Yep. I keep
anyway.
I keep hinting with my European crew by the dice roll, because two of my players there are from Wales, and like the
Hmm.
entire country of Wales is
It's
basically
just
filled with
castles
castles
everywhere.
and forts. Yeah, like, oh, we have this hill fort, and I'm just like, I'm not
Yeah.
jealous at all. No, it's fine. Like, it's fine. Don't please tell me more about. I went past the hill fort today. Shut up! You went past the hill fort. So yeah, I would. I'd love it. Yeah, so D&D in a castle would be awesome.
Hmm.
But that's, I guess, like. I feel so fortunate to have a chance to play with so many different kinds of people that I want to be able to do, more of that really.
Mm.
And so that's why I'm hesitant to say I've crossed it off my list because I want to keep crossing that off the list, with some of
Mm.
these things. So,
Wow.
but yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I haven't even left the country, let alone GM'd outside of it. So that's a that's definitely
It's
a
a whole
bucket
other
list
thing.
thing of
Well,
mine.
what's your
Yeah.
bucket list for DMing?
Um, so let's see. So some of the things I've already crossed off my GM bucket list. Uh, I mean, GMing for Critical Role, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Um, I'm not sure that was ever a bucket list item because that's not really something that you can reasonably
Right.
wish to attain.
Which means I'm
But
going to
yeah,
get my President Obama wish at some point. Like that's
yeah,
how that
yeah,
works,
exactly,
you know?
exactly. But it happened. Yeah, it was very cool. I mean, it's still. I think the me from 10 years ago would be absolutely losing his mind over some of the things that I've experienced and being able to meet and play with and have lunch and all sorts of stuff with the cast and crew of Critical Role. Especially given that I kind of, aside from playing a little bit with my friend Silas when I was in middle school, the kind of start for me with D&D was pretty much through Critical Role. Watching that show right around when it started, like early 2016.
Hmm.
I think 2015 is when they started, but basically within a year. Watching all of campaign one, all of campaign two, and so on. And so being able to then actually literally meet your heroes, but that by the point that it happened, I had become so well developed on my own that it was like meeting colleagues rather than heroes.
Right, right.
Um, and so although they are still heroes to me, they are still great.
And you got to go on that set too.
Yeah, multiple times.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. And they made a set for the show that I ran for them. Like the days prior, they built a custom setup and everything. And shout out to Kyle Shire for all the work that he did and as a producer, putting all that stuff together. I really appreciate it. Um, so that was cool. And I think other bucket list GM items. I mean, performing live, I've gotten to do the most with you, which has been an immense amount of fun and a great honor and pleasure. And um, I think like us becoming friends through D&D has been one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah.
It's been really,
Same.
really great. Um, I would say as far as continued GM bucket list things, I sort of just thought of this, but I'm at a unique point where I'm mostly jamming for a lot of kids here locally in San Francisco. I've transitioned in the past year or so to mostly jamming online to now mostly jamming in person, which I
Hmm.
prefer. Like coming off of the back of COVID, it was all online stuff. I had like three concurrent campaigns that were happening: Ravnica, Strixhaven, Icewind Dale. Icewind Dale kind of closed up. Strixhaven and Ravnica, we both finished between like Ravnica was like 45 sessions, and then Strixhaven finished at 75. Lots and lots of sessions.
Yeah.
The Ravnica campaign did technically start at level one or two, and did end at 20, but the
Oh,
20s with an asterisk because they were level 12. But then, in order to wrap up the campaign and to have them fight the final boss that I intended to have them fight, I
oh.
needed to them to be higher level. So I gave them a little gift,
You
and
you
that gift
boosted them
leveled
by
them.
eight
I boosted
levels.
them. Yeah,
Wow.
they may have, I don't remember if it was 12 or 14 that they were at before I boosted them, but
Wow.
yeah, it was just a temporary thing. So I don't say that really counts as far as 1 to 20. Although they were 20 for the last session. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I mean, I have finished campaigns now. Um, some of them, both of them, the Ravnica and Strixhaven, I wish could have, there are ways that I would have finished them better, I feel. But I've finished them. The thing that I think is big on my bucket list right now, though, is this idea that I'm GMing for groups of kids, and I that won't know this for several years, but and I guess you maybe have more experience with this too as far as students, but the thought of some of these kids who are like 10 years old on average that I'm GMing for, in 10 years, they will be 20 or and more than that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, man, what if some of these clients of mine or some of these kids who go to the San Francisco public program um, end up continuing to GM for them for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Like that would be a lot of support on if they were a client of mine, their parents essentially. But what if, like going into adulthood, now we're actually as they are learning the rules and they're not just kids, we're, you know, as I'm GMing the sessions for them, really doing my best to keep true to the rules and run D&D, but there's a lot of, you know, the Rogue One type of theme that is really really good and gritty and crunchy. Can't You're not going to do with kids. And some of the rules I just completely let fall off the wayside just because it doesn't really lend itself to the fun that they want to have.
Right.
So the idea of knowing these kids as they're growing up and then continuing to DM for them or they DM for me, that would be cool. And seeing how their play as players evolves, and so does my GMing, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
But that is a seed that I am planting right now that I will not potentially see grow for many years. I do already have some. I mean, I guess the start of my DMing stuff was with a group of kids who started the D&D club in my local town as sixth graders, and they
Hmm.
are now in their first year of college. So or just finished their first year of college. So I guess that already is kind of happening a little bit. And already this summer, thinking about reaching out to some of them and we're actually building a little gaming setup in my garage here. We have a wormwood gaming table that we're going to build, and my brother is a filmmaker, and so he knows all about like putting together a set and all that stuff. And so that's our summer project. And so I don't know, that would be a really cool thing for me is to GM for my students for a long time. And also too, I think, yeah, running an actual like 1 to 20 campaign or running for a home game or a home group again. I haven't really had that, but for a while.
I was thinking
So
about Ed Greenwood running, his campaign for 40
right,
years or whatever it's been.
yeah, like I want to do that.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome. I mean, like the corollary that I have, I mean, I've been DMing for over 35 years, but like
Mhm.
the corollary to me is with my students. So I started at St. John's, my first year was in 2003. So now that we are in 2025, I'm going to be getting my 23rd year at St. John's, which means that literally now I have students who were not born when I first started at St. John's. And I had one student, this is maybe 2, 3 years ago, who was like, "Oh yeah, my mom had you," and I was about to
Oh my
crumble into
God.
dust. I was about to crumble to dust, but then he was like, "Well, no, she was continuing education adult." I'm like, "Oh, all right, okay," because I was like, "Listen, I understand that I've been at this a while. It cannot possibly be the case that I was the student, I was the teacher for your mom when she was like 18, and then you're born and now you're gone. Like, I'm not, I was like, oh, so it was like, geez. But that moment is going to happen where they're going to, you'll be in it long enough that they're going to be like,
Yeah.
well, I
Oh my
remember when my,
God. Oh
my,
my
my
God. I
son
cannot
is as
imagine.
I
No
did when I
way.
was young.
Now I'm thinking about some of these kids who have GM. Oh my God, they're having kids. Oh
Yeah.
God, that
Yeah.
hasn't
Oh yeah.
happened yet. But
It was mind blowing. I mean, it'll happen at some point, and like it's better,
hmm.
obviously, than it's better than the alternative. It's good to be able to sort of look, but boy, sometimes you're just kind of like, jeez. And academics makes this a little worse too because there's such a milestone set up. So it's like, and it can blur together a little bit, like fall and spring and summer, and then that sort of passes, and then fall and spring and summer. So like, yeah. But anyway, so when that happens in your D&D career, and you have people who just be like,
Yeah,
my dad said you were a great DM. Like, oh God.
yeah, gosh. I'm now imagining like, 20 years from now, probably still will be GMing. And yeah, that's wild. It's more than likely that almost guaranteed that some of my students are gonna have kids, um, let alone just be adulting.
Yeah. And we'll
Uh,
pass it on what you've taught them to the
uh,
next generation,
yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
think that too is the mark of I think sometimes kids are very um it can be hard to, especially with kids that aren't expressing it often or clearly, whether or not you're making a difference. I mean,
Right.
obviously you are in
Right.
varying levels to each kid.
Right.
And but oftentimes it's never even vocalized. You'll never even know if a kid who was sitting and was pretty much silent the whole session. And there's a few kids that I wouldn't be surprised if this happened with, where it's like I really go out of my way to meet them where they're at and to recognize, like there's one kid in particular who's joined our library program who his mom brought him in, and this actually happens often, but he's kept coming back, which is great. That his mom brought him in, and he's must again like 10 years old on average. I actually don't know exactly how old he is. He comes in, his mom's like he'd like to play D&D, and she gestures behind her, and he's literally hiding behind her. Um, and I like introduce myself. He doesn't say a word, so I just offer him like yes or no questions and stuff. Fast forward to now, he's like fully talking. Him fully talking at sessions is a huge win,
Yeah.
and he's enjoying himself. Getting him to smile and I'm constantly trying to think of ways to make him be incorporated because he's still perhaps the most introverted kid I've ever met.
Yeah.
But the progress, so something like that, where it's like I think through the progress that he's making socially because of the game, I think that it's good work. But I am looking forward to hopefully that in some years forward that I'll I'll be 60 or something like that, or I'll be 70 or 80 or whatever, and I'll have this army of former students who are like, yeah, Zach, you did this, you ran D&D for me, it was so great,
An
so
auditorium all rising as one.
yeah, of all my students. That
Pretty
is
cool.
because you know what? I had my middle school band director who everyone absolutely loved. He's retired now. He's up in Washington with his family, with his grandkids. So I mean, he's living it up in retirement now. But we had a huge like surprise retirement thing for him because he was a middle school band director in our local town. And then the high school band director is obviously different. But the event that we did is that we did this big retirement thing for him where we had the current middle schoolers who he taught, high schoolers who he had taught, and then also anyone who was in town during the time this thing came in of all his former students who were either now in college or had kids of their own or everything. So we had a whole gym full. The high school gym was
Wow.
full of parents of these students and the students themselves.
Yeah.
And we did a concert series where the middle schoolers did a concert that they had prepared in secret. The high schoolers did a concert, and then there was a alumnus or alumni band that performed. I was the MC for that whole evening because I was the drum major at my school, and then
That's
I was
cool.
very close with him as well. So like I literally stamped in my brain is the image of a gym full of people, and then he had a one of his students' parent he became friends with, and they would often go out to dinner and stuff. And so they were like, "Oh, we're just going to go out to dinner," and then the parent was like, "Oh, I got to stop by the high school for something," and then I don't know what he said, but managed to get our band director to come into the gym. And I'm standing there with a microphone in a suit with the middle school band already ready, gym full of people, and then our band director's walking in and he just like stops, his mouth is agape. So that was such a cool thing, and I emceed the whole thing. I had just graduated high school, I think. I want something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So selfishly, I would love,
Oh, I mean, because it, when you're dealing with people on a small, like, three, four, five, six, seven at a time, even if it's
mhm,
15, 20, the problem is that they all, on the student level, they all move on. And on
right.
the D&D level, even sometimes they, sometimes move to other things. And so the idea of having them come back and be like, here's this impact. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you want to know that because on a basic level that you've had a huge impact, but
Yeah.
being able to see it assembled before you is pretty good stuff. And it sort of supports the values that we try to possess, which is to do what we can in our local communities, have that scale up so that people are doing that at the higher levels. So knowing that you could have that in front of you, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
as a teacher and as a DM for kids, I think that's my thing is not necessarily my bucket list is have a big event where people
Big
celebrate me.
event in
That's
an
not really
auditorium. No,
no,
that's
that's not that. But
with the
like
middle school band. I got it.
yeah, yeah, with middle school band, please show up. No, but just that, I think ultimately what it boils down to is having a fulfilling career doing this.
Yeah.
And that means continuing to do it. That means continuing to have good relationships with my students.
Hmm.
You know, at, some might become, as they become adults too, might continue to GM for them, or they GM for me, things like that. So I don't know. I think it's just going to be interesting to see through the passes of life how that changes, I
That's
guess.
exciting. It's exciting to see
Yeah.
how like those things might come together. No, that's a good one. That's a good one. Um, okay, let me throw one your way, and I guess we'll wrap up on this question. And it is um, we have talked about before about I tweeted about slash Blue Sky posted really about this about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, which is thinking a lot about narrative agency and about who is in control of the narrative in a TTRPG under what circumstances. And I've talked quite a bit about the idea that whenever I hear about people having problems with a system, nine of tabletop play, 9 times out of 10, the real problem they have is with the GM that does not know how to run that system really,
Mm,
and that's the issue that they have more than anything else. But I didn't want to talk so much about that. What I wanted to ask about was um, I am curious as a DM, and I understand that we can alternate and we can wear different hats and we can sort of go to different areas that might be out of our comfort zone. But if you are in your comfort zone as a DM slash GM,
mm,
I'm curious if you would prefer to lean more into the mechanics of a system, specifically of D&D. Do you feel, because for example, when you did the two shot at ArvCon, the first one
mhm.
was largely not combat oriented. It was
Right.
largely exploration, solving puzzles, a little bit of role play, and the second thing was a big boss fight combat. And they were both great. And obviously, we love balance. Like, we want to be able to do both those things. However, given a choice between sort of leaning into the more crunchy mechanics and knowing how the rules interact and dice rolling and how everything is designed and action economy and like all the stuff that we talk about sort of in a general way, or the so-called narrative forward systems which that we see with Blades in the Dark or things like that, or Powered by the Apocalypse games and so forth.
Hmm.
um, I'm curious where you would lean, and I will say that part of my impetus in asking this question is the fact that during ArvCon, I also got a chance to watch some of the Damon Runyon scientists play in a game of Daggerheart, which was being GM'd by my friend Mike Underwood, who was one of the design consultants for Daggerheart. And Daggerheart, I think, is doing this interesting thing, and I haven't decided. I need to kind of get the book and read it and make decisions myself, but you obviously have run Daggerheart also
Yeah.
about which is sort of trying to be narrative focused while also being crunchy. And I
Hmm.
don't totally know if that all clicks yet. Again, I have to see it for myself more to know. But that is very much on everyone's mind. Narrative focused, not narrative focused. Would you say that you would prefer to lean more into the mechanics of a system? Or is that kind of for you set dressing over what you really want to do, which is tell stories with people, basically?
I think uh, I am now leaning more towards trying to tell stories with people, not
Okay.
sell toys. Trying to tell stories with people and worrying less about mechanics. I'm at a we last podcast we talked about the learn, earn, return. I'm back
Yes.
in learn right now, and I'm feeling I'm coming up to a shift in my GMing style and preferences.
Okay.
Up until now, and this also has a bit to do with the release of Daggerheart, which I'll get to, but up until now, yes, I was very my I guess first foray into DMing, which I would say kind of my first foray, and then professionally, and then now kind of the ending of this chapter. I would say, yeah, I was very, very focused on following the mechanics and almost feeling like what I was doing was a part of, it could be theoretically a part of D&D's canon, or that it could be accepted by the GMs that I liked to watch. Because I got into the game from watching Matt Mercer's Critical Role,
Yep.
from watching Chris Perkins' Acquisitions Incorporated,
Yep.
and those are really the touchstones that taught me how to play. And so I felt like I needed to be focused on how to run the game within the mechanics, and then also like in a way I could prove that something could happen in the story. I was actually so mechanic leaning that I could prove something could happen by making a mechanic like little twist,
Ah.
if the villain casts the clone spell but uses this component, then technically by this rule, then da 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 da.
So
Or
you would not fudge dice rolls ever and that type of
I
thing,
no,
right?
I'd
Like,
really
yeah.
I
Yeah.
did not like to. I still don't like to. I very rarely will. The only times that I have recently, there is one fudged dice roll in the Critical Role one shot that I ran, but the extenuating circumstances for that was trying to run a one shot on Critical Role within 2 hours. We're already over time. That was pretty much the only exception I made to making the combat end quicker than it would have by letting something hit that normally wouldn't have.
Right.
But otherwise, I tended to be very mechanics focused,
Okay.
and like working within the constraint of the mechanics, because I wanted to feel like what was happening at my table was canonical. I don't know why that's the way I choose to describe it, but like when you're ascribing yourself to the rules, then it feels like everything that you're doing is actually happening,
Right. Okay.
because the rules are dictating you are following the rules. Therefore, this is even more real than it actually,
It
you know,
counts, I
it
guess, right?
counts,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that has been my focus for quite a while. Is like even when I'm designing my own monsters, taking parts from existing monsters and very rarely coming up with my own completely original mechanic. I've been
Right.
very afraid to mess around with the system too much.
Right.
Um, but I'll say, yeah, I'm leaning more now, and this I guess ties into my thought of D&D's canon in general, of how the gods work in D&D, of the lore for elves, or specifically drow and dark elves. I've really for a couple years now been really fascinated and really into the lore that's been written about Lolth and the drow,
Hmm.
and how their cities are built, the old 3.5 books like Drow of the Underdark and
Sure.
stuff like that, that I really like the design of this almost like Star Wars Imperial Empire kind of state.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me. And then realizing it's only recently that I've come across this epiphany, especially with the release of Daggerheart, which I feel like is there's a lot of noise around now on the internet. There's a lot to focus on, both in the real world and the gaming worlds.
Yeah.
The gaming world
Yeah.
is a part of the real world, but the gaming world is made up of fantasy worlds. So there's a lot to focus on. But I do really feel like Daggerheart is a kind of a turning point at this point in time, personally. Given the state of D&D 2024, that version and the mechanics that dictate D&D 2024, I think for the most part are a vast improvement on 2014 edition.
Right.
There are some step backs that I really don't approve of, and I think, for example, the Dungeon Master's Guide of 2014 as a whole is better than the new DMG as far as like the extra content that was put into it. But I think the the example that Daggerheart sets for me again, as someone who got into D&D from Critical Role, watching Matt Mercer incorporate his story to fit the framework of D&D's canon, right?
Yeah.
Like he took the Dawn War pantheon, which was Ioun and Vecna and Lolth, and like literally made Exandria a D&D canon world, to now take basically taking back ownership of his own setting. Not that he ever gave it away, but um, running, finding a way to work both in partnership with Wizards of the Coast and literally get a Wizards of the Coast published module, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, published by WotC of his own world. But then now running, creating Daggerheart and flipping through the book as I have two copies of it, and I'm preparing to do a workshop actually in my local town of like trying to DM Daggerheart, not
Okay.
for the first time because technically I have DM'd it before. Flipping through that book and seeing a book that ties in closely with D&D's canon, like, and when I have videos of this on social media, when I was showing my middle schoolers the Daggerheart book, and for them, seeing they saw the concept art, like when you go to the page for tieflings in Daggerheart, they're called the Infernus, I think. And it has all this concept art of what different tieflings could look like, which there isn't really that in
Hmm.
the PHBs. There's like one image of a couple tieflings around,
Right. Right.
but then they could kind of see this exact parallel of D&D to Daggerheart. But the biggest thing to me was realizing that you could there's something about Daggerheart that's now creating a fantasy canon that D&D fits within and
Hmm.
Daggerheart fits within, but it is larger than both of them, which I
Yes.
never really thought about.
Yes.
And that Lord of the Rings fits in. But for the longest time, only running D&D, I thought of everything that I made as fitting, trying to fit it within the D&D canon and D&D
Oh,
rules.
yeah.
And that includes like my settings that I would call my own, like my own Exandria, right? Where I'm designing it, okay, at every level of design, I'm like, well, how am I going to incorporate Lolth into this? How am I going to incorporate how Groomsh did this to the
Right.
orcs?
Right.
Maybe I'll rename Groomsh or rename Lolth, but now with Daggerheart especially, and at this phase where I'm trying to maybe start to come up with my own setting and really sort of set it in stone, um, Daggerheart's come across at a time where it's helping me realize that I find it much more easy to run something in a homebrew setting in Daggerheart than in D&D, just because I feel like I need to ascribe to so many D&D things. Um, so I guess that's the one of the points that I'm at right now, where as far as the question of would you rather focus on the mechanics and the crunchiness of a game itself and let that sort of be what is the focus versus just telling stories. For most of my career up to now, it's been the former,
Okay.
of like focusing on the mechanics of D&D,
Yeah.
on the canon of D&D, on fitting everything in, on the canon of Ravnica, the canon of Strixhaven, making everything as realistic as possible there. And D&D's been a pretty easy system for me to like. I have part of the reason why I'm a professional, and it kind of comes across. One of those reasons is that when people hire me or the parents hire me, and then their kids come up, especially kids they've never played before, and they're like, okay, we've hired this guy. He says he's a professional DM. And this group of kids walk up and they start asking me mechanics questions about D&D that they've been wondering about, and I answer every single one and give them other alternatives. And then I have noticed multiple times now the parents are like, "Oh, he knows like." In fact, one of the parents was like, "I
Clearly an
feel like."
expert. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the parents was like, "I feel like you have to have a master's degree in D&D to run this stuff." So I was like, "Yeah, I guess so." But so very much into the D&D mechanic stuff, but now I'm leaning more into I'm feeling like I'm ready to try to tell stories just in general.
Hmm.
And if I want to use or take inspiration from the lore that exists in Lord of the Rings or D&D about dark elves or the lore that exists around orcs, then I can. But now Daggerheart's kind of become this prime example to me, at least, of I know you used it as an example of narrative freedom, the way that it's played, where it's like not super mechanically focused, but almost narrative forward.
Right.
I'm still juggling that too. I have to get some more jamming experience with it. I really think that's also up to the GM, how they do it, given the
Yeah,
fear
as is the
mechanic.
case
But
often with these things, but
yeah,
yeah.
but I'd say that's the phase that I'm at right now. Is I would like to start experimenting more with narrative first approaches, which Daggerheart's a huge thing. In fact, like there's a whole section in the Daggerheart book about making the setting that you will then play in as part of the session
Yeah,
zero,
yeah,
which is not something that you do in D&D. You play in Faerun or you play in Exandria.
right. Yeah,
Um,
and I saw
so,
Mike doing that with the Damon Runyon scientist, kind
right.
of working
Okay.
together, which I thought was interesting. Yeah.
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 So I actually kind of like that idea because, and this, the last thing I'll say is that it kind of unifies with something Brendan Lee Mulligan has said, another favorite DM of mine, where he really has no idea what to do for his story until he knows his characters, until he knows their backstories, and then he can start to weave together a tale that's meaningful to them. Like he very maybe he has the bullet points of a general plot that could affect everyone, but really what held everything together for him is the character work. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's the same too of how
Yeah.
in a lot of their our best written shows and everything, yes, you do have this overarching thing going on, but what matters to us as the observers is the relationship the individual characters have with the larger thing, or with each other. And
Yeah.
so Daggerheart's very forward on that element. So yeah, I'd say mechanics focused before, but now trying to be more narrative-y. Um, and how about yourself? How many? What have your experiences been like running more narrative forward games? You've run a lot of D&D, but
Yeah.
what's that been like?
Yeah, I've been, well, it's been interesting to play because I've done, some Powered by the Apocalypse stuff. I've done other systems that are theoretically more adversarial. So I've run, the Talisman Adventures system. It's funny to think about the stuff like with Hope and Fear that Daggerheart, plays around with. In the Talisman Adventures system, that's light and dark fate.
Mm,
And so you get a certain number of dark fate. When something happens, you get more dark fate that you can then play to like pump up creatures and do all that sort of thing. And I have various thoughts, which maybe we can talk about in a future episode about. I have some concerns about making these things too adversarial because I think it's not a traditional game where you're really playing against someone. And I think when you start getting into that mode and it becomes more like the game Descent, the board game Descent, which is very much there's an overlord who is trying to win over the players who are also trying to win. Like that's interesting, and there's like some asymmetrical gaming stuff going on there, but I don't know that I want to do that in a role play setting. But regardless, so I've had a chance to do that. I've had a chance to
mhm.
do very narrative forward rules light stuff. The assignment Impossible that I ran on my channel for a while was based on John Wick's Wilderness of Mirrors, which is a very
Oh,
narrative focused like assembling of spies and like
for a second
how
I
you
thought you
create
meant
your spy.
Keanu Reeves John Wicks. I was
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah,
so
exactly.
you
And
played a game based
how
on
to get
John Wick?
revenge when your dog is, killed. Yeah, no, very much. A lot of gun kata dice rolling there.
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, so I've run a lot of those things that are more narrative focused, and interestingly, I mean, I came at it from the other direction, really, in that I encountered D&D for the first time in the mid '80s, and I was already deeply immersed in fantasy books. I had read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit multiple times. I was reading Dragonlance. I was reading sort of Shannara and various Terry Brooks things. I was reading David Eddings and Stephen R. Donaldson and like
Mm,
a lot of and Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea and all that. I
mhm.
was very immersed in fantasy, which was one of my deepest loves and remains that way to this day in terms of literature, and especially high fantasy and epic fantasy and stuff like that. So I came at it from a narrative point of view. And when I was going through this, even though first edition and second edition are very mechanically driven still, like you can still very much feel, especially first edition, feels very still chainmail, the
Right.
chainmail roots, the war game
Thaco.
roots are still there. And yeah, and THACO, yeah, and you can like and you can play around with it as a GM, and I've done that, right? You can
Mhm.
change things around. There are still these story-based beats, but it still feels very much like a more dramatic war game, that you're sort of playing.
Right.
But I came at it despite that feeling sort of in this sort of story mode about what it was doing for me as a hero when I was playing it. And then when I was DM and GMing it, what did it mean? Like thinking about alignments, which I was fascinated with. Like, what does it mean to be, what would a neutral good character that a chaotic good do that a chaotic good character would sort of turn their nose up at? Could you even have a chaotic neutral character? Not really. You can, but like, can you have one that functions as part of a team? How do those things play out in real life? So I found those things very interesting rules wise. But I was always thinking about it in terms of the story that developed. What I have come to learn, thinking about more of these narrative forward systems, though, is that I've found myself craving systems that can provide mechanical sort of uh, structures and support systems for the stories being told. Not because I can't tell them, because I can, right? Like, I'm a professional storyteller. I write for a living. I teach writing for a living in literature. So like, this is my bag. But I think that having the dice, having the particular tables, feats, character building, these sorts of things, having those things be something that enhances the story. Our mutual friend Tren and I always like to talk about the idea that the dice tell a story.
Right.
And being part of failing forward is allowing the mechanics of the game, even when failure happens within the mechanics of the game, to be implemented into a story in a fascinating way, so that it becomes not a scripted, I was always going to be a hero story, but I was going to live a life story. And the living a life story, the rules that are being taught, or that are presented, make it possible to live that life in fascinating ways, because just like real life, we can control aspects of our environment, but not all of them. And there are things that are beyond our control. And frankly, life, I think, would be considerably uninteresting if we knew absolutely every element that was going to arrive, and all we're doing is basically playing chess. Like, to be honest, and I hate to say this because I don't want to, for all the chess fans out there, chess is fine. I've always kind of preferred backgammon, because chess really is not about randomness, right? Like, chess is really about pattern recognition, understanding like what a person's going to do, baiting them into a certain movement if you can do a certain move. But really, there's no real randomness associated with it. And I always forget, is it like tactical is happening per turn and strategy is more global? I like to think of things where I adjust more on the fly. And so
Mm.
something happens and I have to think about how that gets molded in, and thinking about, in a story point of view, how that works based upon theme, right? And how the theme is what teaches us what to do when randomness occurs, when the mechanics have something happen to us. That I find interesting. So that means, all of which is to say, that I've become more interested, I think, in mechanics. Now, I am always going to be more of a story oriented DM than a mechanics oriented DM, because of my own background. I know the rules of D&D quite well, but to be perfectly honest, I'm sure there are people who know rules better than I do. Probably you do, like, know them even more backwards and forwards. Um, and I have no compunctions about, I know the rules very well, so it's not like I don't know them, but it
Yeah.
is not my focus to the same degree. I am, however, I think, exceedingly good at being able to weave stories together with people so that we are part of a collaborative storytelling process, and having the mechanics feel not ancillary, but an element of the thing that made the story come to life. So that, when you and I were playing our live event in April at Sacred Heart, and that woman was shooting, the bad guy is shooting this beam of energy down at you, and I roll the damage, and you hear the six-sided die hitting the table over and over again. Everyone's like, my God, that's a lot of dice. And then I'm like, you take whatever I said, 30 points of damage. The gasp from the audience at what the number means
Right.
is really powerful, right? I could have said, you feel very hurt, and I could describe what that looks like. And I did describe, the flaking of the shell and whatever. But if I only did that, it still is a little bit of an abstraction that everyone has to
Right.
collectively go, it means something different. But if I say to an audience that knows something about D&D, 30
Hmm.
points of damage to a certain level character, they
Yeah.
know, oh my God, it's real. Like, we know what this means.
Right.
And so I found that for me, I will always be more story oriented, but I have been more interested in the mechanics than I used to be, which means that the narrative portion, the sort of narrative forward stuff, I often find puts more on me in some ways as a GM, and is not as easy collectively to run as something like D&D where I feel there's a different kind of structure in place.
Right.
Having said all that, I really did enjoy watching the Scientist Daggerheart thing. And I am looking forward to getting the Daggerheart book, which I will. I am looking forward to I'm also going to be looking this summer at the Dragonbane system, which is a whole other sort of thing. I'm
Mm.
looking to more of, and Dragonbane maybe is a little bit less narrative, so I shouldn't put that forward, but I really was interested in looking at Blaze in the Dark. Greyshade, my TTRPG designed by Brandon O'Brien, is really a combination of a fifth edition based thing, but with Blades in the Dark vibes all over it. Like in
Yeah.
terms of like how narrative gets pushed and how the GM and the players work together. And so that is very interesting to me. And I want to make sure that I'm really looking forward to sort of implementing those more the narrative. But whereas you started more as as a narrative person, sorry, as a mechanics person and have gotten more into the story. I started more as a story person and had gradually become more interested in the mechanics. But I think in the end, we're going to meet in the middle, right? Because I
Yeah.
still, in the end, will always love story most of all. It's just interesting that mechanics have become more interesting to me as I've gotten older in the GMing style. So,
Yeah. And I think something to your point as well is the mechanics, leaning on the mechanics creates a box to put the story into. Sometimes
mhm.
it's great to have a box, to have the dice tell a story, as they say, and to to say mechanically, okay, you have this amount of hit points, this deals this amount of damage, like you were saying with the crowd and all that. Yeah, I'm for that as well because yeah, at a certain point, it's like yeah, you describe the big damaging move to a character, but if there's no mechanics at all, then who's to say at that point you're just writing a novel and
Right,
it's up
or
to
playing an improv game, which is
right.
fine, but like that's
Yeah.
its own thing, right? Like it's the theater kids sitting around and or kids playing pretend, which again,
Mhm.
and that's not to minimize it. Like that also has great value, but then you don't really need all the bells and whistles. You could just do that. So
Yeah.
um yeah.
So this year, the rest of this year, especially at Gen Con, kind of my goal is to just play as many new games as possible and get some of that experience under my belt. And but yeah, no, I would say that's interesting that, and I think it makes sense you approaching from story first and then now kind of really leaning on mechanics and finding a love for that, and then me being the opposite. Um, yeah, that's really cool. That's
That's
great.
that's why we are the perfect balance.
That is why we are the perfect balance. We are the yin and yang
Yin and
of
yang of mechanics and stories. Oh, one
mhm,
last thing I wanted to say, and we should wrap here, but I did want to
mhm,
say, I did leave one thing off the bucket list that just struck me.
mm.
I would like to co-GM something. I've never done
Ooh,
that. I would love to be able to actually have. I was thinking about just now when we were talking about it, like the mixture of story and mechanics. Obviously, we both do both, but like I would be really fun to see. And I've seen it done, sometimes, but not often because there's so much focus on either
yeah,
GM less, where everyone's telling a story, there's no one who has more authority over anyone else, or narrative agency, let's say, and then one where there's like one singular GM, but not a lot. I've seen it done, but not much, where you have a couple of GMs that are sort of working together, and that also is interesting to me. And
yeah,
I'd like to do that at some point.
yeah. I would too. I think there's a lot of logistics that go into it. That there's a few sections in a couple books, D&D being a prime example, where it talks about how to theoretically code EM. Um, but then I think at a certain point it just becomes up to the two or more people who are co-jamming and their organizational structure and how they
Yeah,
divvy up the work and
yeah.
collaborate and delegate. So yeah, I've had a couple very brief experiences with co-DMing that I wouldn't really le make legitimate claims at actually being co-DMing. Like I had one session that we tried that was for 50 people at once.
Oh,
So it didn't end badly, but it just was barely a session and then it never happened again. So yeah, I also want to try that in
yeah.
actuality someday.
That's cool. That's something to think about over the course of the next couple of years, just to
Yeah.
revisit this idea.
Hmm.
Um, but we should wrap. We have been talking for I think over an hour, so which is
Yeah.
good. But that's interesting, and we again we want to emphasize to folks watching and listening, and not only as always, please thank you for spreading the word and let people know, but do let us know too in the comments down in the YouTube videos, slash, hit us up on our Blue Sky, and so on about these things, about what sort of intrigues you if you are yourselves GMs. Do you kind of view yourselves as more mechanics or story focused? If you're players, do you have a preference for what you want your DM GMs to be? Would you rather they be more mechanics or story based? And also, do you have a gaming bucket list one way or the other that you'd like to do? We would love to hear those things from you. But otherwise, please spread the word about GenGMs. Visit us on our YouTube channel, and you may already be doing that here. And also follow us on social media. But we will be back to you with some more short videos, and then a few weeks from now, we'll have another long video recorded that we'll put out then. Until then, there is Zach Clay.
That is Gregory Wilson.
And we will see you folks down the line. Bye for now.
See you.